Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Kirk Newcomb with Timberwind Capital Partners, welcoming you to episode 3 of Search United. Here today with me is Suman Datta from Legacy Health Capital. He is a 15-year veteran from the healthcare industry. Suman is here to talk a little bit about his experience, his perspective, and also his motivation for leaving the industry to go seek out a business to acquire and operate specifically in healthcare. Suman's really special in the sense that he has direct operating experience across a number of different areas within healthcare. He has a very clear idea of what he wants to accomplish in terms of his search, but he also shows up with a playbook. So if you're a business owner who's not necessarily in healthcare, he has some ideas that for you can help you be impactful in your line of work, specifically say within the staffing industry. We're excited to have him meet with us today, and I'll turn it over to him to welcome himself. So Suman, over to you, bud.
Hi, Kirk. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So I've always been a healthcare guy. From my childhood, I was surrounded by family members who were doctors, surgeons, building hospitals. And myself, personally, I chose to go down the biomedical research route, became a cancer scientist at a Harvard MIT startup, and then went on to build businesses for large companies like Amgen, Medtronic, and Siemens Healthcare. I finally made a decision this past year to go and do my own thing and steer my own ship, and decided to start a search fund in healthcare.
Very cool. So bring me back to kind of you as a kid. You're obviously seeing your parents who've got a background in healthcare. What excited you about it? You know, your sort of origin story, because it's one thing to see your folks, but what's in it for you, really?
For me, I personally feel like human health is the most important thing that we have, that is given by God, and it's we have it in our ability to like move the needle on that and make impact, and that's what motivates me to like improve human health and longevity. And that's what makes me excited, because there's so many different improvements in science and technology that have happened over the last several decades that now are finding applications in healthcare, and it's really improving the quality of lives as well as extending human life. And that is what excites me about being in this discipline.
Can you perhaps share a little bit more about your decision-making process when it comes to leaving the healthcare industry in the capacity that you were previously in to now looking at acquiring a small business specifically within healthcare?
So I actually have been on both sides of the coin. I've been at startups. I've also been at large corporates. But I personally felt that there was a lot of noise in the venture capital funded healthcare space, where you had blow-ups like Theranos and Ubiome, and there wasn't enough of understanding of the challenges in healthcare and how difficult and complicated it was to actually bring new innovation to market and create new innovation. As I thought of going and steering my own ship, I felt my skills and experiences were more suited in a business where I was taking the existing infrastructure and building on it, and not having to promise the moon to somebody, but being more realistic about what was achievable and then going and actually executing and achieving those things. So that's what got me down the path of looking at small and medium-sized businesses, which really require that professional management, require that innovation and development, and it's already a business that is meeting a real market need.
Fascinating. It reminds me of that question that I get all the time from business owners, which is, why don't you just go start something? And ultimately, I think it's a very valid question. However, the advantage that I see, and I'm sure you do as well in this process, is simply that there's something different between buying an established business with an established customer base, a great reputation in place, versus the alternative in the startup world, where you are starting from a standstill and ultimately building a reputation for the business and your services, and ultimately looking to say, be validated, right? And it's just it's a very different place ultimately, because you're starting from a moving ship versus, somebody who's stationary in the water.
I do agree. And one other thing I'll mention is people. So I really like working with people, building teams. And when you have an existing business, you can really drive culture change, you can drive impact on people's lives. And that's something that I've always enjoyed, whether I've been in mentoring roles or management roles in my past lives. And that's something that I feel you have a lot of opportunity to do also in this kind of a role, acquiring and building a business.
I couldn't agree more. I think that we're all similarly motivated, and I do believe that amongst our colleagues, I almost tend to use the term romantic to kind of describe how we think about it, because it is important to us. So let's transition a little bit. You're meeting a business owner for the first time. Tell me, how do you explain to them what it is that you're hoping to achieve?
So for me, it's pretty simple. When I get on the phone with a Zoom call with a business owner, I say, look, I'm really a healthcare entrepreneur, an operator with experience, and I'm coming here to help you to continue to grow and build the business that you've already built. And the added advantage is I come backed by a bunch of really smart and experienced healthcare industry executives, as well as investors that have built several hundred businesses amongst themselves. And they know the playbook across several different functions, several different industry verticals within the healthcare sector. So that's what the message is.
What I would love to hear a bit more about is your career, because I know you've worn many hats, but perhaps also some of the themes within your career and how you kind of see that, given what you're trying to do today.
Sure. So I think the first and foremost is really I've always been extremely focused on healthcare, and I've been looking at the intersection points within healthcare. So what does that mean? So when I was in my undergraduate and graduate years and postgraduate, I was looking at the intersection of medicine and engineering. So what tools can you bring from engineering? What ideas can you bring from engineering that you can apply to medical science and move the needle on that? When I moved into the business side, I was constantly looking at opportunities in healthcare that could benefit from applications of technology, whether that was in cancer drug discovery, looking at computational methods that could help really understand what's happening inside a cell and being able to come up with better targets, to applications in diabetes and using medical devices, using technology and software to better manage patients in those areas and then help improve outcomes, to using technology where you're essentially digitalizing business processes that can then lead to providing better value to the stakeholders, whether that's the payer, the provider, or the patient, with a better operational structure and cost structure, frankly, for your own business. So that's been a major theme for me. The other big theme for me is I consider myself to be a translator. So I can explain cancer research to a finance guy, finance to a marketing person. And I actually clearly remember when I moved from being a cancer scientist into Amgen post business school, I was explaining my cancer discovery projects to the senior healthcare exec in finance at Amgen, and I was able to do that successfully, and that gave me a lot of comfort. The other thing was when I moved into marketing from finance, I was always trying to put on that financial lens and hat, and trying to explain to my marketing colleagues why we needed to be more prudent with the marketing spend that we were doing, because some of the thinking is obviously different. Although I started to also appreciate what marketing could do and where some of the impact was, and also how hard it was to tangibly quantify the ROI on marketing spend. But the major theme there is that I'm able to translate between different disciplines and different functions. And then I think the final thing is really, I really am looking to build businesses at these intersection points of healthcare and technology. And so I've had some successes there, but I would say that I've also had battle scars, and that those battle scars really have shaped my thinking about how to approach things. And what I don't kid myself about is how hard healthcare is and the challenges are. But I'm willing to try different ideas and approaches, but with a sober head of how much money, time, and resources it's going to take to actually achieve certain outcomes. Not only because of the technological complexity, but also of the complexity of the US healthcare system and the current state of it and navigating that effectively. I think we could probably chat about that for hours, but I think the very high level view that I will provide is it's really about incentives at the end of the day. And right now, the incentives in the healthcare system are really distorted, which causes a lot of issues in how this structure is set up right now and makes it hard for innovation to go from the technology side to actual market applications, because it has essentially become a bureaucracy with multiple stakeholders with very different incentives that makes it like you're running on quicksand if you're trying to drive innovation in healthcare.
It actually reminds me of my time back with a business called SkyMD, which was a very early stage software as a service telemedicine platform. And I learned the hard way, looking to help build this business, that there are just an absolute cluster of misaligned incentives, which you outline. And also in that experience, which I think was a huge takeaway for me, is that it's one thing to build a product, but there are multiple use cases or uh, almost paths that a patient are going to take, and ultimately making certain types of products more relevant in certain areas, but not necessarily in others. It's just an absolutely challenging place to be, especially given that some of these sort of value chains are not linear, right? There are multiple stakeholders that make it very hard.
Yeah, I think if you want to be in healthcare, you have to really want to be in it. It is not an easy place. And if you think about the stakeholders, like to your point, you've you've got the physician that wants to take care of the patient and do their job. You've got the payer who is trying to also take care of the patient, but also manage costs. And it is, they have the business lens there. And you've got the patient who is actually has the highest skin in the game, but they don't handle the costs. They don't see the costs unless they're self-insured, and they also oftentimes are not in a position to make all the decisions. They're, depending on the therapeutic area, highly or moderately dependent on their healthcare provider to provide the best advice. So when you have three stakeholders and customers, so to speak, involved, that already creates quite a complex setup for getting anything through. But then if you layer on the incentives of some of the other players in the system, like pharmacies, pharmacy benefit managers, and other middlemen, so to speak, and then layer on regulatory policies, other economic incentives for incumbent sectors within healthcare, the picture starts getting really muddy, and everybody's pointing a finger at someone else about why the costs are so high in the system, where the reality is that there are everybody's got a role to play in it, and it becomes a tragedy of the commons, so to speak.
What I'd love to understand a bit better as well, and the lens for this is that generally entrepreneurs are incredibly good at sort of managing a variety of different tasks and being a mile wide sometimes and an inch deep. Whereas typical careers, the expectation is that you're going to continue to get increasingly focused in what you do as you go further. In your case, it seems like you managed to actually make really strategic jumps across the healthcare industry. Was that deliberate? How did that kind of unfold?
Sure. So, life kind of happens and then it makes sense backwards. But for me, I would say that that was true. But the other aspect was also having a North Star of what I wanted to accomplish long term. And for me, long term, the goal was always to build a business in healthcare. And the way I got there was by going through these different disciplines and different functions and different subsectors within healthcare. The roles that came my way, they were very much opportunistic in nature. Whatever I could I could find at that time, and I could think about, like, this made the right next step. I was doing that. I made sacrifices in terms of compensation, in terms of corporate growth, in terms of how high you could go up the ladder. My focus always was on learning. So when I was a scientist, I was learning. When I was a strategy consultant, I was learning. When I went into large corporates, I was focused on learning. So I looked at each of those places as real world education, and being a finance guy, being a marketing guy, being a guy doing strategic acquisitions, and then building businesses and startups. Each one of those gave me strong skill sets that I feel are going to be helpful for me. I won't say that I can see the whole elephant, like, uh, you know, where in the story of the elephant and the three blind men, but I'm probably a little bit further ahead than the three blind men who are touching the tail or the trunk or the legs of the elephant. So that is now, in retrospect, an advantage that I have, and I'm able to look at a problem from a clinical, operational, financial, and commercial perspective, which I think helps a lot. And I'm also able to draw on my network of folks that are deep in finance, are deep in marketing, are deep in commercial or business development across different sectors within healthcare.
All right, Shuman, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your playbook. You obviously see tons of room for improvement in healthcare in general. I think it's very safe to say you also believe that there's room for improvement in small businesses within healthcare. And what I'd love to do is talk about how you see driving improvements within the eventual healthcare business you acquire rather, while also sort of keeping the broader industry lens in mind. I think that your world of healthcare, the demands are incredibly high from a variety of different perspectives. And I think anybody who is not necessarily in healthcare, that maybe has a less complex environment to operate in, could benefit greatly from how you see you can create value and improve and help support a future business. So I'd love to hear maybe sort of three opportunities that you see within your world that other folks could learn from, and how you'd fix them, of course.
Sure. So first the first one that really comes to my mind is digitalization, and this is a trend that we've seen across industries, but even more so for healthcare. It's one of the few industries that's way behind on the curve, and there's a lot of different areas of opportunities, but I want to focus on process improvements. So if we look at legacy industries like, let's say, nurse staffing, this is a major pain point for hospitals, for managers, for the nurses themselves, because it's a source of major cost. It's also a source of not knowing what the demand is going to look like, and that creates a lot of uncertainty for the nurses themselves. So using data, using matching algorithms that are super simple to actually apply, as long as you're channeling the data in the appropriate directions and feeding it to the decision makers, can really improve that process. And there, I could probably go talk about several different examples, but that's really a classic example of how you take existing industries today and then apply some really simple tools. They don't have to be complex machine learning algorithms. We're talking about simply matching and forecasting demand to the existing talent pool that you have, and doing that in a dynamic environment so that everybody's able to better work and also be efficient. So that's one area of value creation that I see, an opportunity that I see. That applies also to other industries from a digitalization perspective of processes. The other big one for me is remote work.
Before we jump ahead,
Sure.
if you don't mind, let's dive into this sort of element here. You're speaking specifically to nurse staffing. Nurse staffing is one element of this entire staffing industry, obviously. Uh, uh, Putting the right people in the right roles is a challenge across industries, and it's not just within the staffing world, right? Can you help us understand? I think in more layman's terms, right? You're talking about dynamically matching demand, dynamically match with supply, right? I having come from that world in some respect, understand that there are two markets, right? Two sides, two funnels that a business has to fill, and one is the supply and one is the demand. I understand that conceptually, but how do you manage it dynamically? Like, what does that mean to somebody in elementary terms, right? For folks like me who are a little dense.
The better you know what your demand is going to look like and be able to forecast that, and then if you're able to feed that information to the person that needs it the most, which is that manager in the middle, they can make better decisions. So you're really improving the quality of decision making in the business. And whether that's a restaurant business, whether that's a hospital business, it applies everywhere. And you're using data, you're using dynamic matching to be able to do that effectively. And what that does is, well, one is for the owner or the hospital administrator, you're going to be seeing a cost reduction because you're not having to depend on emergency supply of expensive temporary workforce, and you're able to better utilize the folks that are already there, and plus augment it as needed on a emergency basis. But you can definitely reduce the overall cost and make it efficient. For the nurses themselves, they also have more clarity of when there's going to be work and what that work looks like, and not have to like plan their lives around being on a on-call basis for some of these increased periods of loads.
What I'm hearing is some sort of labor management tool is how people can sustain their sanity inside of the staffing side of the organization in a hospital context.
That's right. Yeah, it's a workforce management, workforce optimization problem that you'd be solving. That digitalization piece, if it's inserted into your business, can drive operational efficiencies, better cost structures, which then leads to better value for the business.
Suman, let's segue to sort of opportunity number 2 that you believe could also help other business owners.
The second area that, in my mind, has become even more relevant right now that we're going through COVID is remote work. The issue in healthcare specifically was talent existed in clusters. So, for example, if I was an employee looking for a job, I would likely hesitate to move to a part of the country where if I lost my job, I couldn't find a new job and I would have to move to a different place. So what that tended to do was talent started clustering in hubs, and that brought companies there. Investors were already there. So that became a virtuous cycle that created more stronger and stronger hubs. But then everything outside of the hubs really didn't develop at the pace that would be ideal. And there was also a talent shortage. With remote work and embracing remote work, you can definitely overcome a part of it. And that's already happening in healthcare. So I've now already worked at a couple of companies that have distributed teams. I've also seen how companies have adapted during COVID in doing remote trials, both in the biopharma and in the medical device world, because you can now have investigator sites that are shipped the products and services, and you can onboard patients and trial enrollees over video, especially if the tool is if the device is digital, and you can get the data feed remotely, and then you have your local on-site principal investigators. So that's a very specific example. But if you now take that and look at any general business and how it can embrace remote work, we're talking about a variety of tools that have come into being in the last 10 years or so. There's tools to communicate. There's so many channels to communicate, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. There's tools for collaboration around data, around documentation, around finding information. As companies grow, information silos start getting created. There are tools now that can help you break through those silos and find the information that you need, and be able to operate efficiency. Especially if you're in different locations, you can overcome that. And then we've also looked at issues of how people are in different locations and how you can grow them, coach them. So there are tools for coaching. There's tools for human resource management, admin relievers, remote recruiting, virtual happy hours. There's a whole host of things that you can do, and you can really move the needle forward. And I personally, for example, have benefited from that because the last year I built a team of analysts that I have never met in my life in person. They're spread all over the country. I'm able to access a talent pool that is motivated and aligned with the values of this organization. And we are able to now perform as a high functioning team, even though we're remote, because we're all using different modes of communication. We're getting on Slack, we're getting on Zoom. I would say we're actually operating more efficiently than if we were in an office. The only thing that we miss out on is some of those in-person interactions, which I think can also be addressed if you're looking at more regular offsites. Offsites are done in a lot of companies. But now if you think of offsites as a way of driving that human-to-human connection in distributed teams and making it more of a regular cadence, I think you can definitely move the needle towards successful remote work and successful distributed team. And that gives tremendous leverage to a company to operate in the most efficient way possible and get the best talent.
I love that. I love that. What I'm hearing is not only has remote work been done for a long time, there are tremendous tools that help facilitate that. I don't think that item number two is necessarily lost on anybody in a COVID world. However, what I do hear is you advocating for a flexibility and an appetite to reflect on the challenges that somebody has as a business owner in this new remote reality, understand what those challenges are, and then seek out solutions that almost certainly exist to help them sort of continue to embrace this remote work environment and to support their people and take on say offsites that help them to build that personal connection that's so necessary. That's wonderful. Let's move on to number three. I'd love to hear what you think here.
Number three is really very very close to my heart. It's more healthcare specific, and I have looked at chronic disease management for the better part of the last decade. I've seen different companies, large and small, try to solve it with different approaches. There are some people that think you can use purely technology and app-driven solutions to address really intractable problems in behavior change. But guess what? It really doesn't work. What you really need is a mix of human and machines that can move the needle and make delivering value for behavior change and coaching in a more efficient fashion that actually is sticky. I'll take an example outside of healthcare. So chatbots, when they first came, they were all the rage. However, they don't really work very well. But when they were used in tandem with real people, they started to have an impact, and people on the customer side were more willing to engage with it. So if you take that model and if you start thinking of how chronic disease management is more of a people problem and behavior problem, and having a person in the mix who is able to coach, able to guide, able to be that friend to the person who is actually dealing with the problem, it's a lot more effective. And using tools is great for that. Definitely leverage all the tools that are out there, but also have the trained person in the middle, because more often than not, we need a person to talk to, especially when we're dealing with chronic disease challenges.
Okay. It makes me think of the introduction of the phone tree. Hit one to speak to get to the next menu, where you have five options, and hit four in order to get to the next menu. And it was a way to triage on the phone at any big company. However, it was a terrible experience for the customer, who eventually maybe got to somebody who hopefully solved their problem. We've created this new age where you end up in this endless loop of appified experiences, but you're unfortunately distancing yourself from your customer and creating a less appealing, I guess, experience ultimately. I appreciate that. So it's a word of warning or caution to anybody that wants to apply technology, but to do so prudently and to be mindful of that human connection.
Yes, and I would say that it's people first. So each and every team member of the company needs to be trained, needs to be coached, needs to be that expert. The tools that exist help augment themselves and act as multipliers of what they can do, but it doesn't replace them. And I think that as long as that becomes a reality, I think you can successfully move the needle in disease management as you bring these human resources to populations that don't have access to it today because of cost issues.
Superb. We'll leave it at that. It strikes me that you are in a great place to help folks. My sense as well is that you are understanding the fact that it takes time to build a relationship with a business owner who's maybe contemplating a sale. If somebody is not quite there yet, is there a way that you offer yourself to give them a hand to sort of reflect on any of these issues, or any of theirs that are unique to their business?
I will say two things there. You know, more of my calls are where people are either not ready to sell, or they're not currently interested in selling and might not ever sell. However, I'm on expert networks where I get paid to talk to people and give them business advisory. I've also done consulting in various capacities. So a phone call with a searcher is never a bad idea, because they have skill sets and experiences that are valuable, and having that conversation and using that as a sounding board is always beneficial, because then as an entrepreneur, you're probably the only one in that role, and everybody else in your organization is not in that role. So having even a 30-minute conversation with somebody to bounce ideas off can be helpful. So that's point number one. And the other thing I'll say is, it's never enough. You can't know enough smart money. And I would call, the search fund community of search entrepreneurs smart money. And, you should talk to them.
Okay. And so smart money can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. What exactly do you mean by that? Just so that we're perfectly clear.
Sure, I should qualify that, and thank you for bringing that up. I would say really three things here, right? So the first thing is, every search entrepreneur, myself included, is backed by investors, and in my case, a series and a team of very seasoned healthcare industry executives. That itself is very powerful for any business that I am buying, because I'm able to leverage all of this talent that is behind me and really, stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, and bring that effectively to that business. The second thing that I'll say is, there's uh, a lot of experience that the searcher themselves brings. Usually, they've worked in a particular industry or they've worked in a particular function, and that uh, level of business sense and experience can be valuable to any business. And I think the third and the most important point in my mind is skin in the game, right? So if you look at if you're trying to sell your business or even not, you you're talking to somebody who has the highest skin in the game versus, say, a private equity fund or a strategic buyer. And I've been on the strategic buyer side. So if you look at private equity funds, well, they're coming in, they're not going to run the company. They're going to bring in an operator who is going to have certain incentives. But again, there wasn't that initial connection and passion. They're looking at working out operating structure that helps that company run. But again, that's the skin in the game is lesser. The second thing that I think of is, you look at strategic buyers, you're you're getting a company which typically strategy shifts every few years in large corporates. And the reason is because there's personnel changes, management changes. And so you actually don't know what is going to happen to your business. And also the incentives of the middle management that is then responsible for that business is shifting. So you're actually not going to be able to tell what ends up happening to your business and its people, and sometimes it even gets spun out or cost cut, and your employees might lose out, or your business might just be subsumed and disappear. Whereas with search entrepreneurs, you're getting somebody who is 100% focused on running this business. Why? If this business doesn't succeed, they don't succeed. And that level of skin in the game doesn't exist in any other form of capital that you can get today. So for those reasons, I would say, it's smart money that you're getting, because a person's whole being is invested in making this successful. So they're going to be smart about it and going to bring everything that they have in their own brain, in the experience and the people that they have, to bear on making the business successful.
I appreciate that. And so yes, it's smart in terms of in your, to use your words, but it's because you're bringing in knowledge and experience. I would add it's also incredibly passionate and devoted to the cause. Your goal is, yes, to create returns for your investors. However, that's not going to come at the cost of, say, the people inside the company you acquire, because your exclusive goal is to see the business be successful. And whereas, say, some of the alternative buyers you suggested, their exclusive goal is to drive pure profit and do not have the personal consequences if that does or does not happen. So I appreciate that, and it's a similar reason that I have gotten involved in what we're doing. Building off of that conversation, I'd love to talk about the investors and the community that we're supported by, and specifically on your side. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the patterns, the themes and the types of businesses that your investors have supported in terms of an acquisition, not through your fund necessarily, but through other investors like yourself in our community.
Healthcare has been a growing area of interest within the search fund investment community. And the pattern that I have seen so far, there's been several different types of investments. However, there is this one pattern of service businesses being acquired, but that is combined with tools, that's combined with technology, and really driving towards making those businesses more successful by using these tools and technology. I'll give a few examples, right? So there's this Crown Health that was acquired recently in the last couple of years. It's a mobile and virtual primary care for seniors living in senior housing or by themselves, and you can see how that really improves the quality of care if you have this mobile primary care and virtual care for seniors. And you can see how you can use technology that's available today to deliver some of that care more effectively. So that's one example. I've seen on the more biotech R&D side, Explora Biolabs, which was acquired in the last couple of years as well. It's a vivarium as a service. So the idea being that in drug development, you're testing molecules and biologics on mice, and you need to do the in vivo clinical studies. And so Explora really works in that domain and is an expert in that domain. And it's using various tools and processes to improve that particular segment of the biotech value chain. There's been several others as well, more recently, like Imera in behavioral health, and NovoPath in lab IT, to name just a few that have happened. And I continue to think that this trend is only going to accelerate, because healthcare is probably one of the more obvious areas where you can drive digitalization and improve the existing incumbent businesses, whether they're large or small.
I dug up a statistic as I was preparing for this, and realized that of 22 transactions specific to the funded search investor community that were done in 2020, so highly active in what was, how do you say, one of the wildest years I've ever experienced, in where you'd think investing would come to a halt. But amongst those 22 transactions, a quarter of them were healthcare related, and the rest are across a series of industries. It is amongst the sectors of investment, I think it is the single greatest focus within the search community. So it only to highlight that there's a lot of interest in healthcare, and you're probably pointed in the right direction with regards to, say, investor appetite. I guess you and I get along really well because we're both kind of geeks. I don't have the passion for healthcare that you've had. What are you doing when you're not, chatting with me online and sharing it with the world?
I would say I used to be having a lot of hobbies, like playing the chromatic harmonica, playing board games like Settlers of Catan, consuming a lot of science fiction and fantasy books, movies, TV shows. However, once my son was born in the last 18 months, so he's 18 months now, I think my life has really changed. And if I'm not talking to you or talking to sellers on Zoom, I'm spending time primarily with him, and really that is kind of the main focus these days. The other area that I've been passionate about for several years is really around preventative care, which is something that doesn't get a ton of attention, because we, as humans, try to solve for problems, but then we're not thinking of problems that might come, and our body is eventually breaking down. So I've really tried to learn and understand yoga and meditation and other aspects of traditional Indian medicine, which is known as Ayurveda, a little bit more deeply, because I have a deep interest in preventative care and chronic management, as I had mentioned even earlier. So I've been trying to apply that to my own life, and using myself as a test case, and making it a better quality of life overall. So that's one area I like to spend time on when I can.
That's awesome. You're upright. And I'm not a doctor, but it looks like you're healthy and in good shape.
I probably could do with some more exercise and a little bit more sleep, but yeah, hopefully I'll get there.
That's what you signed up for, my friend with the baby.
Yes.
Good job. Well,
and search funds.
Exactly. What's his name?
His name is Siddharth, and he's named after the Buddha. So the Buddha, who was the founder of Buddhism, was originally a Hindu prince, and his name was Siddharth. So my hopes and aspirations were that he would bring more harmony and peace to people around him in his life as he continued to grow and develop.
I'm going to check in about 14 to 15 years and see if that holds up. How does that sound?
Yes, that sounds great.
Last section, the lightning round. What are two things that business owners can do to increase the saleability of their business?
The main thing that I think of are when I'm engaging with a business owner, I want this to be a relationship. I also am treating it with integrity and transparency. And sometimes or many times it happens that maybe they were not thinking about selling their business, but maybe life is happening and time is coming, and you show up, and then they start thinking about it. So it's important that this becomes a conversation where the entrepreneur who they're talking to is along for that ride, because I'm okay if you don't know what your needs are, but as long as we go through that process of discovery together, I think it can be an opportunity to not only discover what your needs are, but also build that relationship with somebody who could be your successor. The second thing I want to mention is I feel like when you're looking to, from a seller buyer perspective, you're looking at buying a business, but it's also somewhat like buying a home, and the lesser number of things you need to fix, the better. Of course, there will be things to fix. No business is perfect, but it's important that you share that with the seller or with the entrepreneur that is really coming to your door and speaking with you, because guess what, that's eventually going to come out. And given what we've talked about, search entrepreneurs being sophisticated, backed by really seasoned executives, really seasoned investors, it's unlikely that we're not going to do the level of diligence that is not going to uncover things that with all its warts that the business has, and that's perfectly fine. But it's important that you share that up front, because that way everybody can save time if there are deal breakers involved. And the only thing we really have in life is time. So that's the scarcest resource, both for you as a seller and a business owner, and both for search entrepreneurs. And so that's my main advice to business owners and sellers.
I would echo that sentiment that full transparency and candor and relationship are all sort of paramount as in this process, and would advocate that any business owner, or recommend that any business owner, come in and be true and honest about sort of where things are. I would also add that there oftentimes can be a tendency to try and sell the business and paint a picture of what the business is or what it could be. And those are all really important things to do, because obviously you are looking to sell your business. And you, I'm sure, respect that. The challenge exists when you're overselling the business and the reality, and instead of just presenting the facts. We're all trying to be objective, and ultimately, I respect the fact that anybody who's looking to sell is looking to maximize someone's perceived value of their company, and ultimately, what I hope anybody that I'm working with acknowledges is that my goal is to pay a fair price for their business, and ultimately we can get to that point as quickly as possible, assuming that we all sort of understand the landscape for what it is. So I'm with you 100%.
Fully agree there, Kirk. And the last thing I'll add is, this is a major life-changing event for the business owner, and it's possible that that particular entrepreneur might not be the right buyer, but using each of these processes as a way of discovery is better if you're doing it transparently, because you can get to a yes or a no faster, and maybe find another buyer who is the right fit for you. So I see this as a win-win, no matter whether the outcome is a yes or a no in that diligence.
Suman, if somebody met you today and got really excited about who you are and what you're doing, and would love to have you buy their business, how do they get in touch with you?
I'd say just call me. It's 310-890-3725.
Suman, thank you again. It's been wonderful getting to know you through the process. I consider you a friend, and absolutely admire your devotion and dedication to healthcare and acquiring a great healthcare business. Let's search on.
Thank you, Kirk. and you are definitely a friend, and we've gotten to know each other virtually, and this is a classic example of how the remote world can work. Take care.